Bet. All right, we're now rolling. Today, I am with my friend Ashley McFlashy, and I have a question for you. Have you ever met someone and immediately you thought, they are so cool? They're way cooler than me, and there's not a chance that this person would ever hang out with me? Legit, that's how I felt when I met Ashley at our community of faith.
That is so cool.
It's so true. She said she was from Ohio, I think Cleveland, somewhere in Ohio. Her dad was a pastor, and I immediately felt not good enough, not spiritual enough, and as if I had enough. But nonetheless, she is my friend, my partner. Today we're going to be talking about anything that's on her heart and on her mind.
Yay.
But mainly, I want to talk about the convergence, the intersection of both faith and mental health. I want to talk about, is there any answer beyond the text that we could find where we can get some type of help and support? Mm-hmm. But does the text actually mention anything about this? That's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into anything crazy, I want to know about your background, your degrees. Did you go to school hoping to be in the work that you're already in? Mm-hmm. Was it something that kind of happened along the journey? I want like a general consensus. Walk me from college to now.
It's going to be a long walk. But so let's see. Undergrad. I actually studied public relations in undergrad. I went to college because I wanted to be in broadcast journalism.
For real?
That's what I started in.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And I think it was one of my first broadcast class. My professor was like, if you think you're going to be on like a big news station, think again, you're going to start in a small town. You're probably going to end up somewhere in Utah. I said, say less. I'm going to change my major. And so I went the public relations route. But it was still within the College of Journalism, which was where I wanted to be. So yeah, I studied PR, and should have switched to marketing, honestly, but didn't. And my senior year, we did a capstone project where we did a PR campaign for an organization, and I was actually assigned to a nonprofit. And the campaign that we did was the Choose Your Partner Carefully campaign. So it was about educating single moms about the dangers of, bringing in a partner into your home that might hurt your kids. And that's when I was like, oh, I want to go into nonprofit work.
Hold on. This was through a PR program?
Yeah, that was our campaign. Our campaign that we were running was the Choose Your Partner Carefully campaign.
That's dope.
Yeah, so that was my exposure into the nonprofit world. And I said, oh, this is actually what I want to do. So I started looking for internships, and that led me to Houston. So I got to Houston. I got an internship at a nonprofit, and it was supposed to be a year-long internship that turned into 2 years. And then from there, I went and worked at a school because I said, okay, I think I want to be a school counselor. Was that what I wanted to do? No, I wanted to go into public policy. I wanted to focus on education policy. But I said I should work at a school first. So then I went and worked at a school. And then once I got to the school, I said, policy change is going to take forever.
Yeah.
That's not going to help these kids. That's when I said I should be a school counselor. And then my old job had a new opportunity, and they brought me back. So I put a pause on getting a master's degree. And while I was back at my old agency, my supervisor at the time, when I was telling her I wanted to be a counselor, she said, well, you should do social work because you can do more with a social work degree than you can with an LPC. And so I said, okay. So I was there for 2 years, and then I went back to grad school to get my master's in social work. And while I was there, I focused on childhood trauma. I kind of did a lot of learning and internships and things that kind of focused on childhood trauma. When I graduated, I worked at a detention center. And so I was there. I worked with teenagers who had been in the human trafficking. And then I found out I was pregnant with my first baby. And I said, oh, well, this job is going to be a lot of stress on a pregnancy. And because of all my background, right, with child development, I knew that wouldn't be good. So then I left, and I went back into the world of foster care and adoption and worked as a trainer, training families in how to parent kids with hard backgrounds and kids who've been abused and neglected.
For sure.
And then after that, I was able to then pursue getting my clinical license. And so it's how I got to where I am now.
Man, what do you think are some of the misconceptions that people who aren't involved in social work, agencies, foster care?
Goodness, there's so many. I think one, I think when people think of social workers or when they think of child protective services, they kind of jump to like, oh, they're baby snatchers. And I think they don't always realize that how difficult it is to remove a child from their home. I think one thing that people are aware of, but maybe don't understand the full scope, is the racial disproportionality in foster care. So yes, children of color are more likely to be removed. I think that there is a big political issue, honestly, of just needing more better policy around supporting families to be able to keep their children. Because, for example, it was probably, the statistic is old now, but like in 2018, 80% of the removals in Harris County were for neglectful supervision. And so a lot of that is just parents not being able to be present because they're working multiple jobs and they're having to do a lot of shuffling. So I think that there's a great need for reinvestment into the community side of things versus removal. I think those are the things that are like top of mind of what people maybe don't know a lot about.
Something that makes me curious about you, McFlashy, is, don't take this the wrong way,
Okay.
but like your vibrance and personality, it doesn't, I would never have thought that you worked in social work.
Yeah.
Because it has this stigma that is kind of heavy.
Dark and gloomy.
Yeah, it's gloomy.
Yeah.
It's not talked about. It's not something that someone says, yes, I'm in social work. Like, what do you do? I'm in social work. It's usually, it has almost like a DMV vibe to some extent. So that's something that always kind of made me curious on, like, how do you navigate that as a profession without taking it home?
You know, I mean, that's such a good question, especially since I'm a trauma therapist and still have this personality. I think
Which is a gift, too. I don't want to, like, let's not make it sound like.
Yeah, it
That's
is. It
amazing.
is definitely by the grace of God, for sure. And I think I've had to learn how to do that, right? Like when I worked at the detention center, that took a toll.
Yeah.
That job definitely took a toll on me, which was also one of the reasons why I said, okay, this can't be long-term for me. Not just the work, but also the environment. And so I think that what is helpful for me is to remain aware of those things, right? Like paying attention to, how am I handling this? Do I need to take a break? I've been gracious enough to have positions that have offered me some flexibility when I needed to make adjustments to prioritize my mental health, which I know is not the case for a lot of social workers, for sure.
No.
But honestly, I think the best advice I got early in my social work career was, you are not the end all be all for any of your clients. Because I think when you're getting started, when I was like young social worker, I'm like, okay, I got to do. And then I would be wearing myself out trying to find resources. And then I would get a call or a text from a client. And they'd be like, oh, I figured it out. And someone said, Ashley, people figure it out. And so I remind myself of that when I'm working with younger social workers. I remind them of that too, that people do figure it out. Still, do the best that you can, but also know that people will figure it out.
Absolutely. That's what's up. I think that's been the journey in coaching is always complicated because you're not clinically licensed, so it's not regulated. Like everyone has their own flavor. And me working with people with attention deficit disorders, it can get complicated, like supporting and being there for everybody else in such a role. But it's like, who is supporting and building you up as well? So
right.
That's a hard balance to find. But who better to talk to than Ashley McFlashy? Speaking of talk, now you said that you like to talk.
I do.
You said you have no issue with spending enormous amounts of time talking, whether it's in sessions or platforms, and we're going to get to that too about your upcoming endeavors with speaking and things like that. But I want to know, could you talk me through what a day in the life looks like for you?
Yes.
And you don't have to get super specific, but broad, like, what is a day in the life of a trauma therapist?
Broad brush. So not when my alarm goes off.
I mean, you can. I'm cool with that. I personally love those videos. I watch day in the lives all the time.
Day in the life. Once I get my kids to their places, that feels like half my day some mornings. I usually don't see clients until 9 or 10. I try not to start until 10 when I can, just to give myself a little bit of time in the morning to review some notes. So I might start by reviewing notes of the clients that I'm going to see from our previous sessions. So, what did we talk about the last time? What homework did I give you so that I can know if you actually did it? And then, yeah, I'll hop in on the sessions. I try to keep myself to four clients max a day.
For real?
Yes, if I can. Yeah. Also,
50-minute sessions?
And it's also because there's other things that I do, like other meetings that I have to sit in on, or, case staffing. So sometimes I'll have 5 or 6 clients, but those are the exhausting days. And so I try not to have too many of those. But I'll see my clients. We talk, we process, we review homework, we talk about why they didn't do their homework. And then honestly, in the in-between, right now, I'm actually in a 7-month trauma course. So usually at least 2 or 3 times a week, I'm taking some of those. It's self-paced, but just having to read through it, do the assignments, things like that. And then also, depending on what comes up with my clients, I'm having to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So, for example, starting last summer, I just got kind of a wave of clients who were experiencing a lot of grief. And so I realized I needed to bone up on my grief work.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot of just reading,
Oh, so you're not afraid. So you don't feel like you've arrived.
Oh, no, not
So
right.
you're even re-educating yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. When things come up with my clients that I don't feel super knowledgeable, like I can give, I know grief on a very surface level, but depending on with this one in particular, depending on the situation and the circumstance, I want to be mindful of their experiences. And because I'm so big on the science of things, so like what's happening biologically when you're grieving with all things mental health, I need to look a little bit more into that. And then I also like to resource my clients, but I don't want to recommend something that I haven't at least skimmed, right? So I don't want to say, oh, hey, here's this book that might be good for you if I haven't read any parts of it, because I actually don't know if it'll be good for you unless it's coming from a recommendation of someone that I trust. So that is also incorporated in my day at some point, is some reading, some Googling, some looking at books, reading up on the author who wrote this book. Like, are they truly qualified to be talking about this subject? So yeah. And then seeing my people. I'm trying to think what else I do. I think other than reading, then it does just get into like the course that I'm in. I am very adamant about knowing what I'm going into, what I'm walking into when it comes to what my clients are experiencing. And so it's important to me that I'm doing my due diligence, because I have some clients who want to understand what's happening with them, right? So if I have a client who's going through grief, they may want to understand what's happening on a biological level. And then I have some clients who are like, Ashley, I don't care. Like, I don't care what's going on with all of my hormones and my emotions. Just tell me what I can do to fix it. And so there's a balance there for me of making sure that I know enough to be able to help people understand what's happening with them internally and why certain interventions might be beneficial for them.
Can you talk about grief some more?
I'll talk about grief some more. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So you know what I can tell you? This was actually the grief piece of my learning when I was working on my workshop, was a whole journey. Because honestly, it was what took the most time for me to kind of figure out what did you want from this, Lord? Like, as I was getting into the grief work and trying to understand the grief process and how does God handle grief? That was it took me weeks. Like the other elements, like singing, dancing, movement, all of that was a little bit easier, but grief was just it was a monster. And I think it's because it was so layered. So as I was like learning about it and reading up on it and kind of looking at what does the science say about it, what was fascinating to me is that in Jewish tradition, they have, I think it's, and I don't have all my notes in front of me, but I think there's 12 phases of their grief process. 12. Yes. 12 things that, again, if we're thinking about the boxes that they have to check, there's 12 different things that they have to do as part of their grieving process. And that lasts the first 11, if it's 12, I think it's 12. The first 11 are within a year. Like, so it's a year-long process. And then after that, you're continuing to honor that person at two different points. I want to say it's at Passover and then again on like the anniversary. But it was like this ongoing thing. So that was interesting to me when I compared it to some of the research on like complicated grief or for us in modern times. And one of the things that the research demonstrated was that people who don't acknowledge the grief, right, and who try to suppress it, they have far worse outcomes. And one of those outcomes is actually a change in their cortisol level. Cortisol is our stress chemical. And so it's the part of our body that manages our stress. And so it was interesting to me to see that, like, okay, well, what God designed was so that people wouldn't be suppressing this emotion. And it wasn't for nothing, right? It's because
you cooking
God
right now.
He wanted to help manage those stress chemicals. And so even just that piece, and I mean, do you want me to keep going? Okay, so because one of the other things this is where I was trying to bridge it when I was doing my study is so some people are familiar with, in the Bible where they talk about, he tore his clothes, right? The tearing of the clothes as a sign of grief. And that was actually something that they did pretty regularly in the temple. And so I was kind of looking into that and trying to figure out, what was the deal with that? And then thinking about, well, what were pagan cultures at the time? What they would do is they would cut themselves, right? So they would self-harm. And so one of the other fascinating things that I found was that when I was looking at some of the studies that have been done on self-harming is that for a pretty large number of people who self-harm, they actually have very low levels of cortisol. So when people self-harm on a regular basis, sometimes it's because they're trying to like get a feeling. They're trying to feel something. And so even those little things, because grief can put you on either end of the cortisol spectrum. So it can,
never thought about that.
Yeah, it can cause excessive amounts of cortisol and it can cause like not enough because we need it, right? Yeah. Cortisol helps to keep us alert and awake. And so in grief, God put these things in place. I don't want you to self-harm, but if you like tear fabric, if you think about the fabric of the olden days, right? Like it's not like our modern day polyester blends, right? So it took a lot of energy in order for them to do that. And so I wish I would have brought a towel to have you do it. But like when you're pulling that, it's actually a very good release. And it gives you that kind of like adrenaline burst or kick, if you will. So again, even just with that, when we think about something as common as grief, it's layered, right? It's layered in the way that we experience it now. It was layered in the way that they experienced it then. But God had things in place to prevent his people from having complications as a result of their grief.
My mind is blown.
It's fascinating.
I've never thought about that. And you talked about like in our DNA. Bro, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Talk more about like your research in that process too.
Where it started, honestly, was just
Bingo.
I'm a trauma therapist, and any good trauma therapist has read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. That is like the trauma therapist starting point. So about 2 years ago, during Thanksgiving break, I said, okay, I'm finally going to read this book that I've been wanting to read for forever. And I maybe got through chapter 2 or 3. And like the Holy Spirit just dropped this little gem. And he was like, when the Israelites were in the wilderness and they wanted to go back to Egypt, that was a trauma response. I said, you might be onto something, Holy Spirit. Like, come on, tell me more. But yes, as I thought about it, I said Yes. As I start to think about my clients and how often they struggle with change, and I understand that our brains are wired for patterns, right? Patterns create a sense of safety. And so even though Egypt was not better, we can say that objectively, right? It was not better than the wilderness. That desire for familiarity was like, no, we just need to go back to Egypt because it's familiar. That is a trauma response.
Absolutely.
And so literally from there, I said, okay, Lord, well, yeah, I guess trauma isn't new, like that's not a modern day experience. But then what was the answer back then? Because I know EMDR, I know TFCBT, I know all these modern day interventions for treatment, but I know you wouldn't leave your people without an answer. And so literally that was how all this got started, of just me looking into what are the things that the Bible talks about? What are the things that God mandated, recommended, had his people doing that actually aligns with modern day treatments, like the tearing of the clothes, like the 12-step grief process. And so, yeah, there's so much. There's so many things that he has in place.
Insane.
Yeah.
I've never thought about it from that perspective. Why do you think the temptation is always to go back, Dr. Ashley?
I receive it maybe one day.
like even if we know this wasn't even necessarily better, why is the temptation to kind of go back to what was not working versus forward into the future that's unknown? Why is that hardwired into us?
Yeah. I think the way I like to explain it, and I'm always coming from a trauma lens. I think that people, even people who haven't experienced trauma, they definitely have a desire for the familiar, but I think it's definitely heightened when you come from a history of trauma. And the reason for that is, again, the beautiful design of the brain. So the way our brains were created is I always tell my clients, your brains are created to keep you safe, right? And so if you can kind of think about the way that our brains work, recognizing that so much of what our brains do, it is for safety.
Are we almost fundamentally wired to go back into what didn't work as opposed to going into the future of what could be possible or better? Especially in your background, you see a lot of complicated stuff.
Yeah.
That anyone who isn't in that industry, so to speak, we would be objectively incorrect. We would just be very black and white. We would say, here's what you need to do. Here's positive, here's negative, here's go, here's stop. But I think you're dealing with a lot of like yellow. So why do we prefer that? Why is it so much harder to go into the unknown of a better possibility as opposed to going back into the familiar, but it didn't work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
So because of our beautiful brains. So if we think about it, if let's say we're hunter-gatherers, right? I'm out and I'm gathering, and I find some really juicy strawberries. And right next to the strawberries, I see a mama bear and her cubs. I'm going to abort mission and I'm going to head back to safety, right? And so my brain has now made this connection that strawberries equals potential danger, right? So if I'm out again, I know that if I see the strawberries, I shouldn't go there. And so our brains remember these patterns to keep us safe, right? And it was necessary, right? Like
absolutely.
It's necessary when you don't have Wi-Fi, cell phones, all of that. Like there are certain things you have to pay attention to, remember, and familiarize yourself with these things that will keep you safe. This is also the root of triggers as well. Right. So this is how our brains work. I'm going to remember this. I'm going to hold on to this because I'm going to make a plan for it. I know strawberries equal danger, right? This is now the association I have. Stay away from strawberries, then I stay safe, right? Pattern.
Yeah.
Repetition, familiar. So when we think about the Israelites when they were in Egypt, while they were in slavery, there was patterns, right? They knew what time they were going to wake up. They knew probably, I mean, again, just thinking about being under the rulership of something harsh, you know what's going to tick off your
Absolutely.
slave masters, right? So you have these patterns of how to stay safe. So I know as long as I do this, as long as I answer this way, as long as I stay in line, I can create a sense of safety, even if it's not truly safe, right? It's not ideal, but I know what to expect. I know what's going to happen on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Wow.
Friday. It's familiar. When you're going into the wilderness, I don't know what to expect. Who is this guy that, you know, we've been enslaved for hundreds of years? And yes, he performed miracles. Yes, he delivered us. But how do I know that he's going to be good? How do I know that he's going to continue to be good? Yes, he's giving me a cloud by day and fire by night, but is that going to be every single day? Right? There was so much unknown and so much lack of familiarity that their brains were like, let's just go back to what we know. Right? Because even though we are safe here, because they were physically safe, they didn't feel safe because they couldn't control the outcome.
Absolutely.
In Egypt, they had it's always a false sense of control though, right? We don't have control over anything. But in Egypt, they probably felt like they had a greater sense of control because they knew what to do. They knew what to expect. Whereas in the wilderness, and they're trying to get to this promised land, what is that? What is this place going to be? Who all going to be there, right? Like, I don't know. I don't like it. And as much as, you know, we can look back at the Israelites now and be like, those dummies. We do the same thing because we don't know.
No.
And while the repetition and the patterns in our brain were meant to keep us safe, right? To protect us from things that could truly be dangerous. You know, it's kind of like a catch-22 because then when you get used to something, you don't want to change it because the unfamiliar feels so scary.
Jesus Christ, dealing with the unfamiliar. And that translate when you said that about like slavery, I started to think about the Emancipation Proclamation in that time of the Jim Crow South. And even today, if you're involved in anything civil rights, you can still see so much behaviors, habits.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of underlying tone about like, we free now. And why are we still doing so many of the things that we've done before we had any of that? But that's a whole different conversation. But anyways, I want to move on a little bit more into your body of work. I think it's important what you're talking about. And I think it's fire, to be honest with you. I think it's dope, especially posing a question about like, do you think the Israelites had trauma? Like just an opening line like that is like, where is she going with this, bro? So I think that's dope. What do you think? What are you thinking about for the future? What are you thinking about for 2025, 2026? What kind of projects are you working on? What are you up to?
Yeah.
Because this is fascinating. This is amazing. You're committed to education. You down for the research too?
Yeah.
And you're looking at it at like a biological level as well, not just kind of tell me what I want to hear and how does this make you feel type of thing. So I want to know, what are you working on? What you got coming up, and what kind of projects are you putting together?
Yeah, that's such an open question. I mean,
On purpose.
let's see, what am I working on? I think right now I'm working on continuing to build on this connection between what is in the Bible, what's already there, that is healing, right? I think sometimes we can over spiritualize things, and
You better talk about it. You better talk about it.
God's like super practical,
Yeah.
right? Like, yes, he does supernatural things. But he's also incredibly practical when it comes to a lot of things.
A lot of things.
A lot of things.
That's for sure. A lot of things.
And I think like being able to, you know, extract some of these things from the Bible has just been, it's been so, I don't even know, like rewarding, like fascinating. And so I think as far as next projects, really wanting to dig more into that, wanting to bring a lot of this to other people, other churches, because I think, you know, mental health is it's become like catchphrasy, right? Like,
Oh man,
everyone's talking about it. It's trendy.
Pandemic put us in a whole different place.
Hashtag mental health.
Yeah.
Hashtag self-care. So I think that there's
Pandemic put us in a whole
Listen.
different stratosphere
listen.
when it comes to mental health and self-diagnosing
Oh God.
and calling things.
Everything is a label.
It's been wild.
What projects am I working on? So I'm working on trainings for churches, so that they can have some resources for how to help their people who may be struggling with their mental health, how to help them to look at the gospel through the lens of mental health as well. Because I think sometimes people don't always recognize that there are answers there, and it doesn't have to be either or. And I think that's what I really want the faith community to like lean into, that it doesn't have to be you go to your pastor or you go to your therapist.
Yeah, that's good.
No, see them both.
Both.
Right?
Absolutely.
See them both. And I think that I want to bring that to the churches. And then I also want to bring that to other therapists. Because in my training, like as a social worker, we were very much trained about the dignity and worth of all people, being culturally competent, being sensitive to people of other faith. And I think that as a bona fide believer, I've always kind of done my own wrestling when I know one of my clients is a Christian of, should I say anything? Should I stick to the CBT, DBT? Should I stick to my training? And I think doing this work has really helped me to see that, if given permission from my clients, like there's actually a really beautiful way to help them to see that, cognitive behavioral therapy is in line with when the Bible says whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, think on these things. Like we can actually talk about what's happening when you're meditating, why the Bible tells you to meditate, and then what's happening in your brain and biology when you're thinking on these things, and like the neural networks that are being created from thinking on these things. And so I really want to be able to offer that to both sides, right? I want the faith community to recognize that they can get a little bit of understanding into how there are modern interventions that very much are in line with the Word of God. And I want the clinical community to see, oh, okay, I can incorporate these elements or help my clients who are already Christians and believers to see the connection to the work that we're doing. Because sometimes I get resistance, right? Like sometimes as a therapist, I get resistance about what I'm trying to encourage my client to do because of their faith. And so being able to help them to see, no, this is actually in line with your faith. And so I'm giving you this as a recommendation because it actually lines up with some of the things that the Word of God says. So that is what I'm working on.
Man, that's fire. I'm excited about it. I'm going to support it. I want to be behind it. I want to pull up in the room, shout about it. We should do something. We need to do like a webinar or something. We need to do an in-person gathering of encouragement. Because I do think the term mental health has been weaponized to some degree.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I think it has been taken advantage of, not just from clients, not just from people who want help or just learn that they should seek help. But I think some of the clinicians kind of took this last pandemic time and ran with it, ran a marathon. I bet in the last 4 years, I bet there's been more private practices opened than any other 4-year window of time. I guarantee
I would not
it.
be surprised. Yeah. And I think it's that catch-22, right? Because you have people who get into the field because they see a need. A lot of times therapists come into this work because they're trying to do their own work, right?
For sure.
Healing their own
for sure.
inner child
You went through
things.
something traumatic. You tried to self-support. You found methods and ways that led you to getting educated, to getting a degree. And yes.
And there's a beauty behind that,
for
right?
sure.
And then I also think, as with all things, when you see an opportunity for financial gain, well, then it's like, I'm just I'm going to take it and run with it, because I cannot tell you the number of things that I've had clients who have left other therapists who come to me, things that they've been told and the things that they've heard. It makes me want to pull my hair out, honestly.
Yeah, blow it up with that. But yeah, I got you. Just
but
tear the cloth.
Yeah, tear the cloth.
Tear the cloth. Don't pull your hair
Don't
out.
pull my hair out.
In his name.
But it's super frustrating, because I think it also is so harmful, right?
Yeah.
Because then when people get to me, now I'm having to make up for some of the nonsense that some
Unlearn.
other therapist has
Absolutely.
done, and having to just be like, just don't do it. That they're wrong. And so, yeah, I think especially working with people with childhood trauma, the things people say to kids and teens, I just want to drop kick them.
No, it's wild. It's wild. And obviously, Gabby, my wife, is an eating disorder dietitian. So I hear a lot of the other unlearning, education, broad picture type of things. And just the lack of resources, too. Like, you got to do, it takes an enormous amount of research just to find the resources that you would validate, that you would say, oh, this is one is cool and whatnot. But I think, my opinion as a person who works with people with attention deficit disorders, I think collectively is getting better.
Okay.
When it comes to at least awareness type of things. But I do think technology has made a lot of things easier, especially for students, especially high school and college students. They're leveraging all of that stuff. So the time and energy that they actually put towards being productive is a little bit easier to manage. But something that I wanted to ask you was your opinion on the broad perspective, mental health, at least for us here in the USA or Texas and whatnot.
Yeah.
Do you think we're progressively getting into a better place? And I know that's hard to answer because there's so much research in pockets. But do you think for the most part, like things are moving in the right direction? Do you think the awareness campaigns that we ran all pandemic, do you think that brought like at least some fruit for conversations that used to be like abnormal for families? Or do you think, what's your opinion on that? Because I like asking actual therapists who are in the game, not just podcasters and coaches or anybody else. What you think about this? Like, that's cool. But to actually ask a therapist who does this week in, week out, do you think we're getting better?
That is such a hard question. Because I think on the awareness side of things, absolutely. On it being a normal part of conversation, 100%. I do think that mental health is losing some of the stigma, the negative stigma that it had before. And I do credit that, to things like social media. I applaud some of the people who
just a little bit, not everybody, just a little bit.
But I do applaud the people who kind of talk about their diagnosis, how it impacts their day to day, because I do think that it normalizes some of the things. So I think that there's, in the sense of, are we getting better about talking about it? Yes. Are people actually getting better? Some of them. That's what I want.
That's what I want to know.
I think that the conversation is helpful. It's so complicated, because what I will say is that, because you've been talking about the pandemic was like ground zero for a huge spike in anxiety and depression. And so I think if we're looking at from 2020, mental and emotionally, are people getting better? No. I mean, they're actually worse, because anxiety and depression are at an all-time high. However, I think on the flip side of that is, because people are talking about it more, there's more support. So like there's more opportunity for healing than, let's say, if there was, if the pandemic had happened in the 90s, when we didn't have all of these platforms to kind of normalize the experience. I think that it might be even worse, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like,
that
I
makes
think that
sense.
there's a gift of people being able to talk about it and experience it, which is why I think people are running to therapists, which, again, it can be good and bad, because what I also see, like with some of my clients, is they want to do all of their work with me. And I'm like, this has to be done in community. Like, we need people. We were designed for people. And so I think now all therapists actually encourage that and encourage the importance of relationship. And so I think that then keeps their clients in a bubble, right? And it keeps them coming back. And I don't think it's malicious, right? Like, but I think when it's like, well, when I form this relationship with you, now you have become my source for healing, and God. I like, my goal with my clients, all of them, is graduation. Like, sometimes my clients would be like, you're not trying to get rid of me, are you, Ashley? It's not that I'm trying to get rid of you, but it's that I want you to be able to achieve this same sense of calm and healing outside of me.
Absolutely.
I don't want to be the source. I want to be a resource for you. But I also need you to resource yourself outside of our time together. And so I think it's such a hard question to answer, because I think people who are in therapy doing the work with a good therapist are getting better? Absolutely. Are they getting better to the point where they can sustain on their own? I don't know. It depends on their therapist, right? And so, yeah, I think that some of the problems are at an all-time high, particularly anxiety and depression. And people are talking about it. Mm-hmm. So.
But also with people talking about it, does that perpetuate people self-diagnosing?
Absolutely.
Because they get to read about other people talking about it?
Yes. Yeah. And what people don't, the layperson doesn't understand is that the DSM, right, the labels that we get, it was never really meant to be a true diagnostic tool. So fascinating. If you ever read Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, he actually talks about what was in the preamble of DSM that's no longer there, was that they never wanted that to be a tool to exclusively use this for diagnosing, insurance, and all of that, which is not what it has become.
Oh, for sure.
And it's not comprehensive, right? Mm-hmm. It's very thorough. It is very thorough, and I'm not knocking the DSM, not knocking it, because there's a lot of good in there. But I think that, some people read it and they're just looking to that to check a box, to figure out who they are. And that's not what
Absolutely.
That is meant to be.
Yeah.
And so I do think sometimes people start to look at stuff, and I'm sure you see this as an ADHD coach. It's like, do I have ADHD?
Yeah.
I might have ADHD. And it's like, okay, and if you do, what I always tell my clients, then let's just focus on the symptoms, right? Mm-hmm. Whether or not you meet criteria for PTSD, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, I actually need to treat your symptoms. I need you to have skills for your functioning.
Absolutely. Executive function.
The label is not as important as your functioning
Ever.
is. And so I think that, yes, it has brought it to light and people are looking for it, because I think that we're always kind of on a journey of trying to figure out who we are, right? Especially if we're trying to find our identity outside of Jesus. And so if the DSM is going to give me some answers about why am I like this, then let me go ahead and open that book. But it's like, that's not actually going to give you the answers that you need, boo.
Yeah. Dang, that's good. And then also, like what you said about, so one, the awareness of it has done some good, but it also made it easier for the people who are isolated to read something and say, that's me. Or watch a TikTok.
That's why I'm like this.
Or follow this particular influencer who overcame whatever, and they drink melon juice 3 days a week. And this is how they healed their depression naturally. So that person's still isolated, though. Mm-hmm. So could you speak to the importance of community? Because I've never heard it like this.
Goodness, yes, I can.
I've never heard it articulated like that, because that's true. And I got some friends and past clients who you create this isolation bubble to where we're saying, hey, what's going on? Where I talk to my therapist about it. And that's irritating for a lot of parents, too. Mm-hmm. And that's just like, well, Charlie's been going to therapy for like 3 years, but Charlie's not necessarily doing any better.
Yeah.
So what's going on between Charlie and his therapist? Because it used to be celebrated and enough to say, well, he or she is going.
Yep, they're in therapy. Yay!
They're in therapy. Mm-hmm. But now it's kind of like, well, hold on, big dog. Where's the transformation or results? Although I understand clinically, we're not guaranteeing that all this is going to happen, but it does make me curious how a person can go to therapy for 3, 4, however many years and kind of come out the same person, which taught me all therapists are not created equal, first of all. Yeah. So could you talk about like the community aspect that you were getting at? Because I've never heard this like the way you just said it.
Yeah. So interesting. So it's going to take me back to all of my research, right? Me trying to understand trauma. Yeah. So that's a big part of it. So my background, my first introduction to trauma was through childhood trauma, right? Kids who've experienced abuse and neglect. Mm-hmm. So a lot of learning about the importance of attachment. Attachment styles are set within the first year of life. And because of that, that's kind of that's your basis for how you relate to people, right? So good, bad, ugly. how you interacted with your primary caregiver is going to set the tone for how safe you feel in relationships as you age, when if all things remain the same, right? And so that's set. That means if you don't have a good coach, a good teacher, anyone else to come in and intervene in a healthy way, if you've had unhealthy experiences in that first year, that's going to impact how you function. And so I think with therapy, there's a gift there because it can be a safe relationship. And so it can start to undo some of those learned unsafe things that may have happened in early experiences. But because of that, a good therapist is also going to be encouraging their clients to continue to create safe relationships outside of the clinical relationship, because that is a one-off relationship that happens for an hour once a week. And we need people more than that, right? We actually have neurons in our brains called mirror neurons. And so that's the easiest example I can give you is that if I start yawning right now, what's going to happen?
I'm going to start yawning.
That is your mirror neuron responding to me. And so when I talk about like God was really strategic, why would he put those neurons in our brains to respond to another person if he didn't actually want us to be with people, right? Like he built us for connection.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example. We also have oxytocin, right? Which is they refer to it as the love hormone. It's released when moms breastfeed. It's released when you hug. We need people to do those things, right? I need a baby if I'm going to breastfeed and get that oxytocin hit. I need another person to hug me back if I'm going to get the oxytocin hit. And so again, our bodies are biologically designed for other people.
Yeah.
And so it's so important that on a clinical side of things, that therapists are encouraging their clients to create and maintain safe relationships because we need it for survival. And I think culturally, Western culture is very individualistic.
Absolutely.
And it's hurting us. Honestly, it's doing so much damage to us because we weren't built to be and to do on our own. We were built to be and to do in community. And so recognizing how relationships can change your neurobiology, healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships can too. But healthy relationships can literally change the way that your brain is transcribed. And so it's so important that we, as therapists and as people, we honor that and work towards not just having a good relationship with your therapist, but finding ways to identify safe people in your life and then create and build off of that safety.
Yeah, keyword safe.
Yeah, because like we talked about before, the brain's going to go for what's familiar. So if you had lack of safety early on, you're going to seek out some of that familiarity. So you also have to be aware of those patterns, right? Because if I had early experiences that were unsafe and I didn't feel loved, I'm going to repeat those patterns in my adult relationships unless someone tells me, hey, this is a pattern that you have to stop. This is what safety is supposed to feel like. Because right now, safety feels like familiarity, but what you're familiar with is actually not safe.
Not safe at all.
Yes. And so we have to retrain our brains and relearn what true relational safety is so that we can then get into safe relationships, maintain them, and then reap the benefits of being in community.
Bro, I ain't gonna lie to you. Hey, City Life, book us right now. This is fire. The world needs this conversation. I am going to be an advocate for AshleySpeaks.com. That's ASHLEY Speaks, SPEAKS.com. We need to do this live. We'll come to your church. We'll go on tour. We travel. We fly. They got planes. We can do this wherever you want us to do. We'll have an authentic conversation to your community, to your congregation, to your young adults. It don't matter. Whoever you got who needs some help, we're coming to you. Okay? Because this is crazy. She is in a bag right now talking about community. She's talking about research. And she went to Exodus. What more do you need? This is an ad for you. Okay? I need you to do this in real life. Book it. AshleySpeaks.com. Or you can just send me a DM. And we can do that too.
I said because the website's not live We gonna get there.
Okay, we had an update. Website's not live. We had a little update. Send me a DM, and we're gonna work that thing out together. What are some practical things like this? Blow my mind. I've never heard it layered with like considering the research, considering the biology, considering like the spiritual part. And you're right. Like spiritual people tend to think like, I'm just gonna pray this away. We just gonna go to watch night before the Lord, and we're gonna lay down our burdens, and we tend to do that, like absolutely, without considering the mental side of things. But then you over here combining the mental side with the biology. So not only does your what did you say, molecular, whatever big word you use, like not only is it in you physically, but there's a mental side of this thing. But there's a spiritual side. But altogether, you weren't meant to be in isolation. That just makes it harder.
Yeah.
And if you've never experienced safe relationships, how could you feel yourself? How could you feel your way out of that?
Yeah.
So it takes other people who are safe in order to help you get back healthy.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Or not even back healthy, to get healthy in general. So I want to know, and then we're going to wrap this thing up. What are some practical things that people of faith or not of faith, but what can people do to better support themselves as they're seeking help or looking for safe relationships or anything like that? Give us some things, give us some homework.
Okay. So let's see, some homework. Find a good therapist. You can come to me if you need to, if you're in Texas. But yes, find a good therapist that is going to do a good assessment. Especially if you have trauma in your history. If you have trauma in your history, whether it's childhood trauma, teenage trauma, adult trauma, find someone who knows about trauma. Because not all therapists are created equal. And not all therapists get training in trauma. And so some therapists don't know anything about trauma.
That's true.
And so if that's your experience, that is where I would say to start. If you're already a part of a community of faith, don't be afraid to go and talk to your leadership about what you've experienced. Because there is a need for prayer, right? I could go on and on about the importance of all the little things that we even do in church. Did you know that singing activates your vagus nerve? I bet you didn't know that, Rob. But let me tell you a little bit about your vagus nerve.
Come on, somebody.
It is your nerve that runs through all the way through your body that is connected to your autonomic nervous system, which is the system in your body that controls fight, flight, freeze. It also is connected to your heart, your lungs, and your digestive system. When that nerve is activated, it has a calming effect, right? And so, like I mentioned, it's connected to your autonomic nervous system. That is the system that gets going if a bear
comes out,
comes out the closet, and you gotta fight it, flight, or you freeze and play dead, right? So when we sing, we actually
I ain't playing dead. Not me. I'm from the east side.
I don't know what I would do. I would probably play dead.
Bro.
That's I do have a freeze response, but
I do too. But out the closet.
I mean, listen. I guess I could try to run. I don't know. I hope I never have to find out.
Yeah, I know. You're right. I ain't outrunning the bear. Let's just be honest.
Because we can't outrun a bear. What you gonna do?
But if I play dead, like you gonna claw my back or something?
Maybe it'll be like, that's boring.
Oh, really? Hopefully with me, the bear gonna be like, oh, that's my cousin. Man, what you doing here? Hopefully, if I run into a bear, like, hey, what's up, Rob? I'll be like, hey, in bear language. Anyways.
But so when we sing, it actually has a calming effect, and it actually regulates our nervous system. That's the point I was trying to make. I get so easily derailed. But again, when we think about that, the Bible, depending on which version you're reading, it says to sing about 150 times. And so, repetition in the Bible is important. And so when we talk about things being over spiritualized, people always, sing, yes, sing. But no, like God wanted us to sing because he created the vagus nerve, right?
That's so good. And
he gave us this as an easy way for us to begin to re-regulate and reset. And so, as a worship leader, obviously I lean into that because I love to sing. I love the act of worship. I know that there's so much power in it. And so when I learn the science, that it's not just warm fuzzies that I'm getting, but like, God, you are working on me beneath the surface. Come on, do the work. And so I would say that getting into a practice of breathing. And I used to be so anti deep breathing before I went to grad school. I was just like, this is just like hippy dippy nonsense, right? Like, breathe.
Hippy dippy.
But then because I am a why person, tell me why. Don't just tell me to do it. Tell me why I'm doing it. But again, as I learned about how deep breathing slows down your heart rate, and when your heart rate slows down, it sends messages to your brain to communicate safety and calm.
Yep.
So it's like, oh, that's why I should breathe. So even getting into the practice of breathing, paying attention to your breaths. I'm trying to think what else are some practical things. Being mindful of your movement, right?
That's
like
good.
Get up, walk, get outside, move your body. Don't just sit. Especially when that's all you feel like doing.
Yeah.
Like when you're having a moment where you just want to do nothingness, don't lean into that.
Yeah.
Get up and walk. I'm not saying you got to go and run a marathon, but just bring some life into your body and bring some movement into your body to help. And these are just like small things, right? But I think when it comes to, if you have a community that is safe, reach out to them. I cannot tell you the number of times I have to tell my clients, go talk to your friends.
For sure.
Like they're just like, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. I don't want to be a negative Nancy. I don't want to bring all of my bad mood and change the energy. I don't want to bring the vibes down, right? And it's just like, stop it. If they are your people, they are your people.
They are your people. Absolutely.
Right? Like that is the beauty of being with people, is that you can bring all parts of yourself. And if you don't create that sense of safety by being willing to demonstrate that, then they aren't going to do it either.
No
and then y'all going to be in your closet sad and crying instead of, sitting on the couch having some popcorn and crying. Like, if you're going to do it no matter what, at least do it with someone that you love, that you care about, that can actually bring a sense of ease and prevent your thoughts from running haywire.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those are like just off the dome, some practical things.
I appreciate it. Wonderful job answering those questions. I think this is going to leave people very seen. I think people are going to feel seen, but they're going to feel called to action too, not just like, man, let me just chill on the sideline. Especially about the thing you said about community. So I appreciate you for doing that. Next.
Okay.
Overrated or underrated?
Okay.
2 options.
Okay.
Question number 1. Getting 8 hours of sleep each night. Overrated or underrated?
Underrated.
Why?
We need sleep.
Tell us more.
8 to 10 is the true recommended amount. So if you think about it, I'm always going to take us back, right? Before we had electricity and all the things, our bodies were very much on the rhythm of the sun, right? When the sun set, we didn't have an option but to rest.
Time to go to sleep.
And to do nothing. Now, all I gotta do is flip on a switch and I can keep grinding. We need so much more rest than we actually get. Significantly more. We weren't built for this nonstop work, which is also why it's taking such a toll on our mental health.
That's a fact.
And which is also why I tell my clients, because I read it in a book, don't remember which book it was, but that rest is actually an act of rebellion. Right? And so I say that to my spicy clients who like to go against the grain. I'm like, oh, you want to go against the grain? Go take a nap. Since you like to be, oppositional, go lay down. Because the world's not telling you to lay down. So recognizing that, to be counterculture is to rest.
Okay, cool. Underrated, overrated. Performance reviews.
It depends on who's giving them, but I would probably say overrated.
For real?
Yeah.
Why?
Because what are we doing?
Yeah.
What exactly are you reviewing? Now, granted, I've never gotten a bad performance review, but I also don't know that I've ever received a performance review that really spoke to all of my performance. Because I think, especially as a therapist, if I'm a therapist working at a big practice, what are you reviewing?
You're never there.
You're not there.
Well, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Okay. 2 more. 3 more. Overrated, underrated. 2 weeks notice before quitting.
Ooh, depends on the field.
Anyone. Don't pick on therapy on this one. Any field.
Oh, any field? Then
Yeah.
it's overrated.
You don't think companies deserve a 2-week notice?
They wouldn't give me 2 weeks notice if they was firing me.
That's true.
They wouldn't even give me a day.
That's
And I might
very
not even
true.
get severance. It's just
Or
like,
severance, yeah.
you out.
It's like, I'll holler at you.
Yeah.
All right, take it easy.
I mean, as someone who has hired people, yes, I would love 2 weeks notice if
Same.
I'm having to fill
Same.
a gap. But as an employee, it just depends on the role that I'm in. As an
Yeah.
employer, yes, please give me 2 weeks notice. Employee, yeah.
Okay. Overrated, underrated. Appetizers before the main entree.
Oh, underrated.
For real?
Yes.
You're an appetizers person?
Yes. Come on, give me a good little crab cake cooked well.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on, because listen, appetizers, depending on where you are, they really give you, because they also set the tone for
They
what
do
you're
set
about
the
to
mood.
eat, right? So if it's like the appetizer wasn't that good, especially if I ask the waiter, what's your most popular? What's the best on
That's
your menu?
true.
If I ask that and you bring me a nasty appetizer, well, now I already know to lower my expectations for the
Dang,
entree.
you can't even get excited. Well, what if it's a place that you, well, nah, because if you frequent it, you already know.
You already know. That is how I gauge, especially if I'm going to a steakhouse. That's how I gauge a steakhouse. How good was my crab cake?
That's a great point. Last one. Underrated or overrated? Health insurance premiums.
Okay. I mean, I guess if I say it's overrated, because I feel like we should just have universal health care. So that would mean that they're overrated, right?
Come on, Canada.
Yes, it should all be free.
And that's a wrap. Friends and work stuff. Ashley, big flashy.
This was so fun.
My partner.
Right on cue.